Hello, welcome to City Council Spotlight. Today with JT Scott, Ward 2 City Councilor. I'm Sarah Fishman. Hi, JT.
Hello, Miss Fishman. Good to see you today.
You can call me Sarah, please.
I'll try.
May I call you JT?
Go right ahead. I'm just oddly formal and anachronistic as a result of my upbringing.
No. You were, I believe, raised in rural Tennessee, right?
I was.
So maybe you have a degree of politeness that I lack.
Oh, I wouldn't say that it's a lack. I'd just say it's a different style of expression, and one that still routinely gets me into trouble up here when people say, that was my father. So.
All right, well, we've never actually met, so this is kind of weird, but we're meeting. I'd like to start, if you don't mind, with you giving us just a little bit of background, how long you've lived in the city, how long you've been on the council, that kind of thing.
Sure. I've been in the area for over 20 years, but I really started to put down roots in Somerville when I started a business in Union Square in 2011, and became involved in a neighborhood association. Got really engaged, starting with the planning process in Union Square in 2012, and watching how the city frankly mismanaged that process. And eventually ran for office in 2017 because I felt like we needed desperately more accountable and transparent representation. So I was elected and have been serving my neighbors since 2018 in that capacity. So 3 years now.
Okay. And you are a Union Square business owner, right? Can you tell us about that?
I am, although it's tough to say at this point, since it's been almost exactly a year that business has been closed due to the pandemic. But no, I'm happy to do that. Honestly, it's an incredible way to stay connected to my neighbors, and a good reason to wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning and get an early start on the day.
Say what it is so people get why you're getting up at 5.
Well, I
didn't say what it was.
I don't want to be plugging my business, but since it's closed, maybe I'm on the safe side there. No, it was formerly known as CrossFit Somerville, right behind Dunkin' Donuts on Prospect Street. We're going to be going to a new name when we come out of the pandemic here. We still haven't figured that out yet.
No branding worries here. If you're shifting to a new name, then this is not plugging. You see what I'm saying?
I guess. Right now, during this time, our emphasis has been on keeping our people safe and doing what we can to use the property and the facility to help our neighbors. I mean, probably the biggest thing that we've been doing there has been hosting Somerville Community Fridge, which is a free food pantry for anyone and everyone in the neighborhood. It's completely volunteer run. It was spearheaded and led by 2 recent Somerville High School graduates who still live in the neighborhood. And it's been amazing to see how many people come together to build this structure and to fill this fridge and surrounding pantries with food.
Sorry, what exactly are they doing? What exactly is this group doing?
So it's a community fridge, and these popped up all over New York City and are starting to pop up in the Boston.
Oh, community fridge.
That's right.
Yeah, I've seen it.
Yeah. So it's an amazing resource. There's food there for anybody who needs it, and through the winter we also had winter clothes there for people who are in need of that. And I see neighbors and folks in Somerville there every day, getting what they need and leaving what they can.
Yeah. I've gone around and looked at a lot of the little free libraries as an excuse to get out. There are a lot in the western part of the city. And at the beginning of COVID, people put food in there and toilet paper and eggs, and, everyone needed something. You also own, I believe, Fire Breathers Fitness, LLC. Is that what it sounds like?
Well, that's just the name of the corporate entity that runs the gym. I mean, maybe we'll end up being called Fire Breathers Fitness after the pandemic, but no, that's the company that I started to start the gym.
Okay, so that's athletic, or is it also circus? You're in the circus guild, so do you do fire swallowing stuff?
Well, I think my membership in the Circus Guild has lapsed at this point, but yeah, that is where the name came from. I've performed for many years, doing fire eating and fire breathing and fire spinning, fire performing of all kinds. In fact, it wasn't that many years ago that I was performing in Union Square at the Ignite Festival. And every year I love to go back down there and see my friends performing.
So what is harder, swallowing fire or being on the Somerville City Council? I really want to know.
Definitely being on the city council is more challenging and more time consuming, but I have to moisturize less for that job.
You have to what?
Moisturize less.
Oh, okay. Well, okay. I'd like to see that someday because I believe that's probably an elective first in Somerville. I don't think there ever has been a fire swallowing elected official here before. So, and you have a family, right? You have a partner and you have one or two, do you have kids?
At this point, I feel like I'm probably up to my armpits in them. Been home all the time. I do have a wonderful family here in Somerville, and honestly, we're all trying to get through it together. My oldest is kindergartner at Argenziano, and at Argenziano, and it's been an amazing year actually to watch the Somerville teachers adapt to this remote learning and put in incredible amounts of effort to make it work for as many families as possible. It is hard to convey just how much time these teachers put into not just the classroom hours, but to prepare for these sessions and to make sure all the materials are uploaded for each day. I'm getting emails at all hours of the night from the staff at Argenziano, making sure that everything's been caught and everything that wasn't caught on that day gets followed up on. So I think honestly, the hours for teachers have gotten longer during this pandemic. But
I have friends and relatives who are teachers, and they say this is definitely harder than in classroom teaching.
Yeah, and I mean, it's just an environment that nobody was prepared for. And I have nothing but admiration for the adaptability that's been displayed and the care that's been taken for these kids. It's been amazing to watch my kindergartner grow and learn so much this year. And in some ways, it's a real blessing that I get to sit there and be part of that. I get to hear what she's hearing and see the friendship she's forming even through this digital medium. And so it's been a real blessing in some ways to get to go to kindergarten.
That is such a good dad response. That's lovely. I mean, a lot of people I'm sure have felt this. Has it been harder or easier, or maybe you can't compare for her is she learning to read, or did she already know how to read? Has it been a challenge for her to progress or learn, or whatever verb you want to put in there?
Well, I mean, I think being 6 years old is tough on everybody. But no, in her preschool time, she wasn't reading. I think the most reading she was able to do before kindergarten was at the Momo's place down on Somerville Ave. She could read the thank you on the front of the little trash bin.
Read the what?
The thank you sign on the front of the trash bin at the
that's awesome, though. That's a good one.
But it is a good one to know. Gratitude's important. But no, it's amazing. She has grown so much in her math skills, her counting, she's writing equations, she's learning her sight words. Wow. It is spectacular. And so it's hard for me to tell. This is, like I said, my oldest. But it's working. Let me put it that way.
Have you had neighbors or constituents come to you saying that they're having trouble coping with COVID? We're at the 1-year anniversary, of course, we've said, and have they come with concerns that you've been able to address either by going to the city council and proposing an ordinance, or just by directing them to the refrigerator or another resource? What have the concerns been?
I mean, continuously. And the concerns are all over the map. There's housing insecurity problems, or let's say, troublesome landlords engaging in shenanigans. There's been, the food insecurity issues, that, needing material assistance. And that's where mutual aid networks like Mutual Aid in Medford and Somerville, the Mamas organization, has been incredibly useful, as well as, the Office of Housing Stability and some of the various city departments. But, and like you said, the Somerville Fridge, just providing a really wonderful place for people to gather to make sure that the support is there. Yeah, and I mean, even beyond that, 1 year in, everybody's nerves are very frayed. And so even things that wouldn't have been a big deal 2 years ago end up being real interpersonal struggles, especially when it's hard to, have the standard interaction of just seeing your neighbors and being able to maybe talk things out over a fence. So I'd say probably about 4 months in was when the real community and neighborhood mediation started. And it's really emphasized to me how important it is that we have folks that people can call who are, I am just the elected representative, and I do everything I can to take care of the 11,000 folks here, and it's an honor and a real compliment that when people are having a problem, they just pick up the phone and call me. But I'd really like for Somerville to have a group of folks who are trained in mediating conflict, who are available, whose only reason for being there is to try to make Somerville, and you're part of it, a little bit better on a hard day. And that's something that I'm working on with people, because ultimately there are a lot of problems where there's not an established city department that feels appropriate to fix it. So
that sounds like a good idea, a needed resource. So what is my question? It's always good to know your question before you try to ask it. I know that the school district decides who goes into, the school district makes school administration decisions, but the school buildings are owned by the city. Now, I think it's correct that the high school opened for the first time this past week, but it was younger kids who went in there. So what is the status of the other school buildings in terms of HVAC, appropriate air circulation? I know there are some issues that may or may not be holding back students returning to the classroom.
Yeah, so I'll start off with, you're absolutely right. The district establishes policy, hopefully, ideally under the guidance and in collaboration with the school committee. And yes, I've been told that school buildings are actually the purview of the city. But you could fool me, because in terms of the administration of that, our mayor and the executive branch have kept that very tightly under control, as with many other things.
I didn't hear that. Has been what?
Has kept that very tightly under their control. It has not been a collaborative process with the city council to discuss the approaches of how to work on the buildings, what work is needed on the buildings. All those decisions are held very closely by our mayor. And I can understand, for the sake of expedience, for moving quickly, sometimes decisions need to be made quickly. But again, we're a year into this, and it is hard to justify a continued lack of a collaborative or communicative approach.
So do you have a specific example of this, or this being a roadblock? Because I mean, if you have an old building, I'm being devil's advocate, but if you have an old building, I know there are issues with both the Brown School and the Winter Hill School. It's rate limiting, right? I mean, you got to fix it for it to be safe. So is there an example you have of the closed decision making being a problem?
Well, I think it's always a problem. I think really you need to be gathering input to make effective, informed decisions that actually represent what your community needs. But in specific, I'd say that, there's no argument that our schools and our school infrastructure has been underinvested in at every level for decades. And That's why when the mayor approached the city council with a request for $7.5 million to engage in a lot of infrastructure updates to these schools, it was passed, very, I believe unanimously, and with very little contention around the concept of investing in these schools and their air circulation systems, because whether you went to these schools or not, you know that these systems are outdated. So, whether or not we had a pandemic, that kind of investment was probably called for. The question is about what is being done and also the justification around it, right? The need to get this money right away, and we're going to have these schools up and running inside of, a few weeks. Clearly there have been delays. Clearly there have been problems. And clearly when it comes to prioritizing the work and what work needs to get done before students return to any given building, that has not been a decision-making process that's happened in cooperation with the city council. I can't say that the outcome would have been any different. I can't say that it would have been or it wouldn't have been, because frankly, I haven't been given the visibility and the information. Ultimately, I really do think that we work better as a city when we are working together. And it's been disappointing to see the different groups of folks who are passionate about the city and about their kids and about education, whether that's parents, whether that's the elected members of the school committee, whether that's the superintendent or the teachers themselves, all being held in these different silos and in some ways set against each other, as opposed to being able to truly sit down in a room and look at the information and make choices together.
So do you have any updates, at the risk of not focusing on the big picture? Do you have any updates on the Brown and the Winter Hill and whether or not there is going to be mitigation? Some people have said, let's not write off the whole school. Let's see if through natural means, like using a fan, opening windows, can we use some of the rooms in some of those buildings? Do you have any updates on that?
Honestly, the most recent updates I've gotten on that have been from Facebook, and most of the time I get my updates from the mayor the same way everybody else does, by press release. So I can't say that I have any news about that at all. I've heard about the continued problems in terms of getting those schools back open, but from the executive's perspective, and I've heard some of the conflicting perspectives out in the community, but it hasn't been a conversation that I've engaged with, or really the city council is much engaged with. And that's largely, there's a separation of authority issue where we try to be deferential to the school committee and their authority. But then there's also just the fact that the executive has so much control in Somerville. And that's one of the reasons why charter change is going to be important, is to balance the branches of our government here and hopefully create a more
So I'm gonna ask you, since you're sort of going in this direction anyway, since the mayor has announced he is not running for re-election, without discussing him as a political animal, what impact does that have on the city that such a long-term mayor is departing, and a mayor with his style of governance? What do you think that means for the city?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting inflection point, and from a purely technical basis, it is going to be a challenge. The size and complexity of Somerville's government has changed dramatically over the last 20 years of Mayor Curtatoni's tenure. I mean, in many ways, the entity and operation of city government has gotten easily 10 times more complex than it was. And that is not just in the size of the budgets, but also just in the sophistication and the amount of operations happening up there. There are some very long-serving department heads who are either reaching the natural end of their tenure after decades of incredible service to the city, or who are very closely aligned with our mayor and who are likely to follow him onto whatever his next endeavors are. It's going to be very, very challenging for whoever the next mayor is to come into that system, to have an effective transition. And transition is not something that you take for granted. It's actually a practice thing. And we have not practiced the art of transitioning executive authority in this city in nearly 2 decades. it's not, I think it's something that many people are overlooking the challenges of, and I think it's going to be something that whoever our next mayor is needs to have the support, the broad support, not just of the city council, but also work early with city department heads, work early with their networks and their broader supporting network of folks that they work with outside of city government, to ensure that we have excellent people ready to step into those roles that are being vacated, and that the mechanisms, the simple, basic, getting the trash picked up level mechanisms of the city don't fall by the wayside during potentially messy transition. I'll be honest, it's something that I had concerns with and talked to the mayor about a very long time ago, because nobody's mayor forever.
How do you think this was, how do you think this will change development or efforts to any sort of development? I mean, this mayor has been very expansive, you know, Assembly Square, which of course started before him, but will this change the direction of the city's growth in any way significantly?
Well, I think it's certainly possible because clearly the executive sets priorities for the city and, you know, hires department heads that are in alignment with those kind of goals and visions. And you know, ultimately it's a big team effort to get policy implemented and move the city in a certain direction. But I think you're already seeing the tension with a city council that was elected with some different priorities and styles than our mayor over the last 3 years. And some of that has led to things like the condo conversion ordinance, which between the condo conversion ordinance and the new zoning, which both did allow for transformational upzoning and some more by right development in areas where it makes sense near transit hubs, also was very protective of the neighborhoods. And what that's led to is a lot less of the opportunistic condo flipping that was happening back on our side streets and in our neighborhoods. And that's a very distinct choice from what this current mayor in his second year in office, I believe, you know, the planning department under him issued a report talking about how condo conversion was going to be so great for the city and how it was such a great revenue source. I think we've learned a lot. I think we can look at what's happened in the city as over the last 2 decades, not as an accident or happenstance of being close to Kendall Square, but really as an expression of the policies that we've been pursuing. And I'm glad to see that we're seeing less of that opportunistic condo flipping happening in the neighborhoods, and also really proud to see the hundreds of thousands square feet of commercial lab construction that's happening right now in Boynton Yards and is forecasted in the future for Assembly Row, because that's bringing much needed jobs and commercial tax revenue to balance the situation of a city that hasn't had that kind of balance in honestly a century.
So we don't have a whole lot more time, but I want to know, in terms of Union Square specifically, you were involved in development issues there, obviously. Does your business abut land that is being redeveloped?
It does, and which is why I recuse myself from any matters related to that master development project and parcel. But quite honestly, the mistakes that were made there were made in the period from 2012 to 2017, before I took office. You know, contracts were entered into that are going to be long binding after I'm dead, to be honest with you. These are very long-term contracts that the mayor signed. So that piece of it is out of our hands. And I think I actually mentioned it at the very start, that the mismanagement of that process was part of why I felt we needed different representation. And I think the proof of that in some ways is seen by the fact that even though that process started in 2012, there hasn't been a single building coming out of the ground out of all that giant eminent domain planning. Whereas south of the tracks in Boynton Yards, a much more collaborative and open public process around participation and planning actually has lab buildings that are almost complete right now.
So what accounts for the difference?
In the amount of control that the executive holds over the process. And well, that could be an entire hour-long episode. Let me just say that I think as we come into the election this year, it's a really interesting opportunity for the city to choose something not just about the style of governance, but also how we're going to express our values, especially as we're coming through this year of a pandemic, especially as we have been more thrown face to face with the racial inequalities that express ourselves in our nation, in our policies, even our employment ratios. I think it's a really important choice, an opportunity for us to make a choice about how we're going to address those kind of racial disparities and what we're willing to do to make that a reality.
So we're almost out of time, and I haven't asked you at all about police oversight, which is something I think you've been very vocal about. I want to make sure that people know that they can go online, and there's a survey you can take about what your opinions of what civilian oversight of the police department should look like, what the priorities should be. And you don't even have to still live in Somerville to take it, and it can be anonymous. So we're going to put up a link for that. But I know it's a big issue, but very quickly, do you see that civilian oversight process progressing or not?
Well, I do, and it's been a lot of work. This is a process that we had to fight hard to get resources from the city devoted to it, but I'm very pleased that we have. We hired two incredible individuals, one to work on the policy analysis and one to work on the outreach and really developing the overall process. And both Irene and Mason are spectacular individuals that I'm really looking forward to folks in the city getting to know more as we host not just this first community meeting on March 24th, but also a series of subsequent smaller conversations. The work of building trust with the communities in our city of concern, the communities that interact most often with the police, is not going to be something that happens quickly. But the fact remains that currently our police department doesn't have any functional oversight. Even when complaints are filed, they're filed at the police station and the police department investigates itself. The larger conversation about the future of policing, of what policing looks like in our city and who we call when we need help, is one that absolutely must progress and one that is far, far beyond time for. But that's a conversation that does have to be led from the executive branch and this new director of racial social justice, which we're told might be hired any day now. What I'm not willing to do is to wait on the larger question of just who watches the watchman. So this civilian oversight process is beginning. There's just a starting meeting on March 24th, and there will be a whole series of other smaller conversations that will hopefully result in some legislation that's already looking to be some of the best in the nation. But that's only working with the realities of what we have right now. The more interesting and challenging problem is what kind of reality we shape next.
And unfortunately, we have to stop there. This has been City Council Spotlight with JT Scott. Have a good day.
And you as well. Good to see you.